Before we go into the details of proposal preparation, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the foundations of research. Understanding these three key concepts, ontology, epistemology, and axiology, will help you think more deeply about your creative process and the meaning behind your work. Let's start with ontology, which asks the question, what? Ontology is about what exists in your research world, what you are studying or exploring. In the context of your art practice, this could be your subject matter, concept, or focus of study. For example, you might be exploring identity, memory, or environmental issues. That's your ontology, the what of your research. Next is epistemology, which asks how. This refers to how knowledge is produced or interpreted. In other words, how you discover or express what you know through your creative process. In studio-based practice, this might include your methods of making, your choice of materials, your experimentation, or even how you document and reflect on your process. It's about understanding how your artwork itself becomes a form of knowledge. Finally, we have axiology, which asks why. This deals with the values and significance of your study, why your research is important, and what its meaning or impact might be. In creative research, this could be the contribution your artwork makes. Perhaps it raises awareness, challenges perception, preserves culture, or introduces new aesthetic experiences. So, when you start thinking about your proposal, always keep these three questions in mind. What, how, and why? They form the foundation that connects your idea, your process, and your purpose, turning your creative practice into meaningful research. Now, to put it simply, your research process can be broken down into 4 key steps: what, why, how, and so what. These questions are not just theoretical, they're very practical, and they can guide the way you think, plan, and write your proposal in a more structured and meaningful way. Let's start with what. This is where you identify your main idea or issue, what exactly you want to explore or study in your creative work. It could be a concept, a question, a theme, or even a personal experience that inspires you. Here, you should define your theme and purpose clearly. What exists in your research world that you want to understand or express through art? Next is why. Once you have your idea, you need to justify its importance. Ask yourself, why is this topic meaningful to you? Why does it matter in a wider context, artistically, socially, or culturally? This is where you explain the relevance or motivation behind your work. It shows that your project isn't just about creating something visually appealing, but also conceptually and contextually significant. Then comes how. This is the practical stage, how you're going to explore your idea. Here, you select your methods and materials and decide how you'll carry out your creative research. It may involve experimentation with media, testing new techniques, or documenting your process through sketches, photos, or journals. In short, this is where your research becomes visible through making. And finally, so what? This step encourages you to reflect on your contribution, to think about what your work reveals or contributes. Ask yourself, what new insight or understanding does my artwork offer? Does it challenge a perception, propose a new way of seeing, or bring attention to an overlooked issue? This reflection helps you articulate the impact and value of your creative research. So, by keeping these 4 steps in mind, what, why, how, and so what, you'll have a clear framework to develop your proposal and connect your artistic process with the meaningful research outcomes. Once you understand the what, why, how, and so what, the next step is to apply these ideas in your own practice. Let's talk about what it means to work through a studio-based research approach. In this approach, the studio becomes a site of inquiry. It's where thinking happens through making. That means your creative process itself is a form of research. Every time you sketch, sculpt, experiment with materials, or test new forms, you're not just creating, you're actually investigating ideas and generating knowledge through practice. We can think of this in two parts: studio practice and studio process. Studio practice refers to your personal methods, ideas, and creative system, basically how you approach your work as an artist. It's the way you think, choose materials, and build your own rhythm in the studio. All these things come together to define your creative identity. Studio process, on the other hand, describes the stages of developing your work. You begin by exploring, then developing, refining, resolving, and finally presenting your outcomes. These stages show how your ideas evolve over time and how each experiment or decision contributes to the final artwork. In short, research through practice involves three main things. First, identifying a question or problem that drives your creative exploration. Second, using the act of making as a method of investigation, allowing new discoveries to emerge through the process. And third, reflecting critically on your outcomes, analyzing what worked, what didn't, and what you've learned along the way. So, in a studio-based research, your art making isn't separate from your research. It is your research. Your ideas, your experiments, and your reflections together become the evidence of inquiry, leading to new understanding and artistic growth. Now that you understand how the studio functions as a site of inquiry, let's look at some of the methods you'll actually use to conduct your research. In fact, about 70% of your research is in practice, meaning that most of your investigation takes place in the studio. Your data is visual. It comes from what you see, make, and document, rather than written surveys or statistics. So, your sketches, photographs, experiments, maquettes, and even unfinished works are all part of your research evidence. The studio becomes your laboratory, and your artworks are your findings. Some of the key methods you'll be applying include: first, observation, sketching, photography, and mind mapping. These are your tools for recording and developing ideas. You'll begin by observing your subject or theme closely, making sketches, taking photos, and mapping out your thoughts to discover relationships between concepts. Second, material experimentation and maquette development. This is where you explore possibilities with form, material, and technique. Through small-scale studies or maquettes, you'll test how your ideas can be expressed visually and materially. This kind of hands-on experimentation is essential for discovering new directions in your work. Next, documentation, through a visual diary or reflective journal. This is a very important part of your process. You should continuously record your progress, thoughts, challenges, and discoveries. Your journal becomes a visual and written record that shows how your research evolves over time. Then comes analysis, reflecting on your process, form, and meaning. After each stage of making, take time to review your outcomes. Ask yourself what worked, what didn't, and what meaning is emerging through your creative decisions. This reflection helps you connect practice with theory, allowing you to understand your own creative process more deeply. You'll also engage in peer critiques and supervisor feedback. These sessions are valuable opportunities to see your work from different perspectives, refine your ideas, and communicate your intentions more clearly. Lastly, you'll focus on the integration of contextual and theoretical insights. This means connecting your practical work with relevant readings, artists, and theories. By doing this, you position your artwork within a broader artistic or cultural context, strengthening the intellectual foundation of your research. So, remember, in studio-based research, your practice is your data. Every sketch, photo, material test, and reflection is part of your evidence. With these methods in mind, the next question is, where do your ideas come from? Let's explore the different sources of inspiration that can guide your research direction. In creative research, your starting point usually comes from something that resonates deeply with you. It could be a personal experience, a social observation, or even a technical experiment that sparks your curiosity. There are several common sources that artists often draw from. First, personal experience. These are themes related to identity, memory, or belief. Many artists begin with something personal because it gives authenticity and emotional depth to their work. It could be inspired by your background, your daily life, or even your own reflections and emotions. Second, observation. This comes from what you see around you, your environment or social phenomena. It could involve issues in your community, environmental changes, or everyday situations that capture your attention and make you want to respond through art. Third, history and culture. Drawing from heritage, mythology, or culture. This is especially meaningful in our local context, where traditional crafts, cultural symbols, and community stories can serve as strong visual and conceptual references. Fourth, media and technology. Finding inspiration in digital culture, AI, or popular media. Many contemporary artists engage with technology, remixing, reinterpreting, or even critiquing what they see in the digital world. And finally, experimental processes. Sometimes, ideas emerge naturally through materials, forms, or techniques. When you experiment in the studio, trying out new materials, combining methods, or even making mistakes, you may discover unexpected directions that lead to new concepts and artworks. Here's a simple tip. Always try to connect your inspiration to context, issue, form, and artwork. In other words, start from what inspires you. Understand its context. Identify the issue or question. Explore it through form. And finally, translate it into your finished artwork. By doing this, your creative process will have both direction and depth, allowing your project to grow meaningfully, from the first spark of inspiration all the way to your final presentation.